I forgot to announce this, but on the test, you're going to find a listing, a place where it asks you to list 5 areas where that Islam is in conflict with the United States Constitution. I'm not going to tell you what they are. I mean, there's several places, really, but at least you're warned is coming. This is one reason. This was why that so many students get a higher grade on this test, because either says a strictly bonus, 2 points for each listing that's correct. In other words, say that Islam teaches this, but the United States Constitution says that. Or Islam teaches that, but the United States Constitution says this. 2 points each, up to 10 points, and that's enough to raise your grade on the test by a whole letter. And yes, it is possible to get more than 100 points on this test. I feel fully justified in doing this. If you don't know, you can ask somebody in here who does. If you, as long as you don't do it during the test, no. Or you can look it up between now and then. It really should be obvious. I mean, there's the stuff we've talked about, what Islam teaches that the United States Constitution does not go along with. I guess that's about all the explanation I need to give on that. Again, a lot of areas. I'll give you one example. No, what example? The United States Constitution teaches equality between the sexes. I mean, it says that men and women have a right to vote. Islam, much too often. Now again, you might say, I know of an exception, an Islamic country that doesn't, but Islam generally, it puts the men above the women as a general rule. And this is becoming an issue worldwide. Okay, that's one area. All right. Don't say that one teaches brotherly love, and I mean, they both do. I mean, both.
So just the difference?
Yes.
So do you just list them, or do you have to like give
List them, yeah, 5 areas. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's room on the test for you to write it. If you can't list them on the one page, you can always go down to the bottom of the page and list them. It's not that, but yes.
Do you list like if they have things similar?
No, differences. Differences, yeah. No, there are several differences. Things that the United States Constitution says, and that. Anyway, all right. All right. Moving on to African history. Now, more than 40 years ago. I mean, I'm from Middletown, Ohio, but every time they'd have a Black History Week, there'd be a whole lot of rioting in the streets. So hopefully we're a little bit beyond that right now, even though I must state what all of you know, that in the last 10 years, race relations in this country have taken a downturn. But, all right, when I got laid off from here during the spring, I went to work at Lowe's. And you work at a place like Lowe's, you'd hardly realize that there is a racial problem in this country. White and black worked together, sat down and had lunch together, got along together, just like there were no issues. But anyway, all of us know that there are issues and it's still going on. I hope that we'll see an improvement. All right, moving on. The earliest kingdom in Africa that we know about. Now, the African people were not always a tribal people with just a bunch of tribes. They did have kingdoms at one time. The earliest we know about was Kush. Kush is just south of Egypt. At times, well, at one time they even conquered Egypt. That's how powerful they were. There are persons who say that the Kushites came first before Egypt, and then that Egypt copied from the Kushites. Kush and Egypt have a lot in common. The Kushites have, well, they had writing that looks like Egyptian writing, but again, all we can find of the writing is stuff they wrote on stone, and it's not enough for us to decipher, so we can't read the writing. Maybe someday we'll find a whole bunch of writings buried in a vault somewhere that we might find a library and we'll be able to read it. But at the moment, We can't read their writing, but it looks like Egyptian. They built pyramids like the Egyptians, but the pyramids were like only 6 feet tall, nothing at all to compare to the Egyptian pyramids. Some people believe that they were the first humans to learn how to farm, and they taught the rest of mankind to farm. That the idea of farming spread from them. Farming involves raising plants and animals, certain types of plants that can be grown in a garden, or certain types of animals that can be tamed to where you don't have to hunt. Now, Kush is a tropical country, and you might think farming in a tropical country is easy because you can plant year-round. That is true, but farming in a tropical country can be a challenge because there are diseases that hit plants that do not hit plants in a temperate country. Diseases not just caused by microscopical bugs, but by locusts and whatever. Locusts would hit every once in a while. Here in the United States, we just can't imagine seeing a cloud form in a distance and know that it's a cloud of locusts. And this cloud comes and gets closer and closer, and the locusts come in. They saw off every limb off of every tree except for the really, really big ones. Anything smaller than your wrist, they can saw off. When they have eaten everything green, they up and leave the farmers completely destitute. Again, we can't imagine that, but this is what people who farm in tropical lands have to put up with. Again, they might have been civilized before the Egyptians were, might have been after, but we do know that they influenced each other. We do know they traded with each other. Nubia and Egypt traded. And at one point, Kush actually conquered Egypt. Another name for Kush is Nubia. The Assyrians fought a war with Nubia at one point. Assyria went down to Nubia and defeated the Nubian army. But the Nubian kingdom's fortunes, like the fortunes of all these other ancient kingdoms, rose and fell. You might say waxed and waned. Kush, I'll say this, a lot of scholars believe it's related to the biblical Cush. Cush was a grandson of Noah, the man who survived the flood. He had a grandson named Cush, and a lot of persons believe that the original Cush went to Africa, and the K is simply a variation of the C, but it's pronounced the same way. Both of them pronounced with a K, both of them pronounced Cush. Kush became a real trading center. At one point they traded with Rome. Now here's some of the products. Ivory, iron, gold. You might know that ivory comes from the tusk of elephants. The practice of killing elephants for ivory has been outlawed worldwide. On the black market, they say it still goes on because we now have the substitutes for ivory. Piano keyboards used to be made out of ivory, but now they make them out of some other types of polymers. Now, while I'm on the subject of slave, well, of course, I've already mentioned how the iron and gold also came out of Kush. Again, Africa has more iron than any other continent in the world. Slaves, I'll be mentioning that later. That was a big, big problem with Africa. It is known that the Egyptians made slaves out of Africans. The Arabs did, and even the Romans did in later times. Then slavery was outlawed in Europe for hundreds of years. Then in the 1500s, making slaves of Africans it started happening again. And it was to last till the mid-1800s before most of the world finally outlawed it. The last country to outlaw slavery was Brazil, the last big country. The United States was slow at outlawing it. The United States outlawed slavery in 1865, Brazil in 1880. All right. Axum. What gets confusing about this is that these countries have different names. Another name for Axum is Ethiopia. Ethiopia still exists to this day. Ethiopia is one of the world's poorer countries. Yes?
How do you spell that?
A-X-X-U-M. Yeah, you might not can see it clearly here. Axum. Otherwise known as Ethiopia. Now, if it's to get you even more confused, it had been part of the old kingdom of Saba or Sheba. The kingdom of Sheba is mentioned in the Bible. All right, while I'm on the subject, go on. According to the biblical account, the queen of Sheba heard about how great Solomon was, so she went to Solomon herself, carrying her wealth, but her wealth was completely overcome by his. And she spent some time at Solomon's palace. And according to the story, she and Solomon had a son together named Menelik. And from that time forth, the kings of Saba or Sheba claimed to be descended from the union of Solomon and the queen of Sheba, and through their son Menelik. Now, the last of them, and this occurred in my own lifetime, the last of these kings was Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie was the emperor. Every Jamaican is familiar with Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie was practically worshipped as a god by a lot of the people living in Jamaica. Yeah, go ahead.
The Rastafarians.
What's that?
The Rastafarians.
Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah. See, the reason I know this, my brother spent 2.5 years teaching in Jamaica, and I went down to see him twice. And he talked about how much they liked Haile Selassie. Unfortunately, Haile Selassie was overthrown, and the communists took over Ethiopia, and Ethiopia has not been the same since. But back to these times we're talking about. While I'm on the subject too, the history of these nations was passed down orally. So Haile Selassie, for instance, all of his ancestors could name every ancestor they had all the way back to Solomon and his son Menelik, supposed son Menelik. And of course that meant they could name them all the way back to Adam. All right. Well, while I'm on the subject, there are persons who have said that the Ark of the Covenant was in Ethiopia. And persons went looking for it. And Italy tried to conquer Ethiopia in the late 1800s and lost. But then they went again in 1936 and this time conquered it. But when Italy lost World War II, they had to give it back. Yes?
The very first country in Genesis that it mentions Ethiopia.
Very first country, yes. Mentioned in Genesis 1. Indicating it has a long history. Genesis 1, yeah, about the 4 rivers, and one of the rivers went around the land of Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Yes, actually it's Genesis 2, now that I think of it, yeah. But the very first country mentioned. But anyway, supposedly Solomon's son Menelik stole the Ark of the Covenant, and the Jews to this day do not know where it is, but there are some Jewish people living here who are the only known descendants of the Jewish Levitical priesthood.
They're black.
They're black, yes. They can trace their ancestry back to Ethiopia, back to the Levites, and in turn back to Aaron. The other of the ancestry has been lost. Now, I want to say this: our DNA tests are getting better and better all the time, and they might, through DNA, be able to restore the ancient Jewish priesthood and prove which person is from which tribe. All this all this is a little bit speculative, but anyway,
I have a question.
yes.
From which tribe does the Queen of Ethiopia?
This what?
Which tribe? I mean, which kingdom?
Okay, the Jewish, probably the priesthood always came from the tribe of Levi. Always. So these Jewish people who claim, I mean, these black people who claim to be descended from the Jewish priests are Levites, assuming that they are right. And again, they have this oral history they passed down by oral tradition. As you were all leaving last class, George here was telling about how that the Arthur of Roots, Alex Haley, visited Africa himself and got some oral tradition from of his own people and his own tribe that he was stolen away from. Probably that his ancestor was stolen away from. But they do have an oral history that's passed by word of mouth that is believed by, taken seriously by some scholars. Now, Ethiopia was like Kush, a trading center. They traded, Ethiopia is on the northeast coast of Africa, just south of the Sudan. There's Egypt, then the Sudan, and then Ethiopia. And Ethiopia traded oftentimes to the Far East, as far away as China, and Indonesia, what is today Indonesia, the East Indies. And then in turn they got some goods from these places. Now, in the 300s, Ethiopia became Christian. However, the Christianity was not the Christianity other Christians liked. They tended to copy Egyptian Christianity, which was considered heretical by the other types of Christians. So particularly the Eastern Orthodox persecuted them, and this made them separate from other Christians. The Haile Selassie, for instance, was a Christian, but not a Christian like the Orthodox, or not a Christian like the Roman Catholics, but he had his own brand of Christianity. I will say this, my dad didn't like him because he set himself up to be worshipped as a god, or at least he was worshipped similar to God. Yes, go ahead.
Selassie, he left land in Ethiopia
Yes.
for Jamaicans. Followed his faith, but that's Rastafari.
Okay.
It was in Shashamari. And they could go there and clean the land. A lot of them live over there and farm the land and live there. He said,
Let me clear. Are you saying he left Ethiopia and then went to live in Jamaica?
no, he left Jamaicans land in this country, in
Oh.
Ethiopia.
Oh, okay.
Acres and acres of land. If you wanted, you could go there and clean the land. Because
Oh.
it belonged to Jamaicans.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, provided for diet.
Okay. Again, I knew that he had a strong affinity with the
Jamaica.
people of Jamaica. Yeah, very strong. All right. Anyway, I will say this about I'm going to be talking about Orthodox Christianity when it comes to chapters 12 and 13. Some Orthodox Christians actually still practice animal sacrifice, lamb sacrifices, and goat sacrifices, sheep sacrifices, and bull sacrifices. Still do according to the Old Testament. Standard Christianity does not follow this practice.
That's not some denominations of Christianity do.
Some do.
Because
Among the Orthodox,
Sacrifice stuff?
not a lot, not living.
not a lot, but I've heard that
During
some
the Feast of
do.
the Trumpets, and I think it's the Passover feast. I know the Feast of the Trumpets for sure. We get, I'm pretty sure it's a lamb, and we burn it.
Oh, please, oh no.
It's not alive. It's already dead.
No sacrifice anything.
Okay.
They cooking.
While I'm